hearing this?
Anybody hear that?
How can we possibly have the slightest idea what to expect?
Well, we're back.
Hold on to your butts.
Welcome to the Jurassic Park podcast. I'm your host, Brad Jost, and we're here to discuss all things Jurassic, including the movies, TV shows, music, toys, and more. In episode 425, you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. I'm slightly under the weather, and hopefully I can get this intro out. But Conor O'Keefe is back again with another episode of DINO DNA, taking a look at the sauropods of the franchise and focusing in on the Titanosaur from Jurassic World Rebirth with returning DINO DNA guest, Dr. Carrie Woodruff. And if you missed his previous spotlight here on the podcast, you can check out Dr. Woodruff's previous episode with Conor in the Pachycephalosaurus episode. Oh, my voice does not want me to say these words so long. That was episode number 412. But today they are focusing on the massively huge dinosaurs of the franchise, and I am very hyped for the Titanosaur conversation, because for me, what I saw and heard in the film, the Titanosaurs were pretty great. I loved them, but were they accurate? That's my question. So let's go ahead and find out together today. But of course, while you're listening to this episode, hit us up on Blue Sky to continue the conversation, because I can't talk very much today. But as always, please check out our live streams. If I'm still like this, I don't know if it's going to happen this week, but we'll see. I'm planning on it. We discuss all of the latest Jurassic news from around the world, Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. EST. Also, be sure to subscribe to my newsletter for all things Jurassic, TV shows, movies, my podcasts, and other thoughts and appearances. You can find the link to the newsletter on JurassicParkPodcast.com/newsletter. And since our last mailbag was such a big hit with everybody, we wanted to go ahead and list off our voicemail line again here. You can call 732-825-7763 to leave us a voicemail there. It's about 3 minutes long. Go ahead and leave your message there. Or you could email us a voice memo or a written message to JurassicParkPod@gmail.com. Let us know all of your thoughts and feelings on Jurassic World Rebirth or Jurassic Park Survival or whatever number of things Jurassic that are happening these days. Mattel toys, whatever it may be. Just let us know your thoughts and feelings, or just say hi and we'll add you to an upcoming episode of the Jurassic Mailbag. I'm very excited for that. It's been so much fun returning to that segment. So here's hoping that you join us next time. But it is time. So let's go ahead and dive into another episode of DINO DNA with Conor O'Keefe, and this time taking a look at the sauropods of the franchise with Dr. Carrie Woodruff.
Well, maybe dinosaurs have more in common with present-day birds than they do with reptiles.
You do understand these are actual animals, right?
You read about them in books, you see the bones in museums, but you don't really believe it.
You should hear a 4-year-old try to say Archaeornithomimus.
I read both of your books. You liked dinosaurs back then.
All vertebrate embryos are inherently female anyway. They just require an extra hormone given at the right developmental stage to make them male.
You know that I'm not at liberty to reveal the asset's genetic makeup. Nothing in Jurassic World is natural.
You will see a herd of the first dinosaurs on our tour, called Dilophosaurus.
How would you classify it, Billy?
Suchomimus, snout.
No, think bigger.
Baryonyx.
Spinosaurus egypti. Actually, Charlie, those are herbivores. They really wouldn't be interested in fighting with each other. But these ones here are carnivores, and they really like fighting with each other. They use their teeth and their claws to rip each other's throats out.
Al, he's 3. Let's wait till he's 5.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to DINO DNA, the show where we dive deep into the science and current understanding of the real-life prehistoric animals that inspired the amazing dinosaur characters and designs that we see in the Jurassic movies. I'm your host Conor, and today, off the back of the massive Titanosaur that was introduced in Jurassic World Rebirth, we'll be looking at the Sauropods, a group of dinosaurs that probably needs no introduction. They're those massive herbivores with huge bodies, long necks and tiny heads. Now for today's show, our guest is once again the incredible Dr. Carrie Woodruff, who we last had on to talk about pachycephalosaurs a few episodes ago. Carrie is the curator of vertebrate paleontology at the Philip and Patricia Frost Museum of Science in Miami, and was previously the director of paleontology at the Great Plains Dinosaur Museum and Field Station in Malta, Montana. Welcome back to Dino DNA, Carrie.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be on.
Great. And yeah, just before we get into it, as I mentioned, we'll mainly be focusing on the Titanosaur, the Titanosaurs. There's a whole group of them. But we might drop in chat about the other sauropods from the Jurassic movies as we go. But Carrie, I've got my main question for you is, what do you know about sauropods? I know that you've done a lot of work on them. So can you give our audience a little lowdown on the kind of things that you've done in the field and at museums, in collections relating to sauropods?
Yeah, so even though I was talking to y'all last time about pachycephalosaurs, sauropods are my bread and butter. So they're, I basically only, I'm dabble in pachycephalosaurs, but sauropods are, my professional meat and potatoes. And I work on a lot of different things about sauropod paleobiology. So that's, their life in general. But really strong emphasis on their life histories. So I really try to understand a lot about from the moment they hatched out of an egg up through their entire life, and basically understanding how their skeleton underwent changes, all through their life up until the day they died. And so I've gotten to study sauropod specimens in museums all around the world, which is really cool. Like my first research trip ever, which was also overseas, Jack Conor sent me to Europe to look at sauropods, and basically hitchhiked my way back to Bozeman, Montana, looking at sauropods here between here and Germany. So that's pretty cool. I've gotten to, like I described the smallest, what we think is Diplodocus or something related to basically the smallest skull. So the skull was like the size of a banana. Which is pretty neat.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was still probably like a 20-foot long animal, but, still like baby, in extreme air quotes by sauropod standards. Wonderfully, coincidental during, it was during the time of COVID, but we published on the very first dinosaur with a respiratory infection that was a sauropod and also probably died from that respiratory infection. And it's really cool. Like I've gotten to dig up sauropods. Like a few years ago, I went to Mongolia to dig up an amazing sauropod with Phil Curry. So I get to do a lot of cool sauropod stuff.
Awesome. You are the right person for this job then. Let's get into the sauropods from the Jurassic movies. I mean, we've had them in the movie since the very beginning. We've had Brachiosaurus in Jurassic Park, iconic scene. Then a little lesser known one, Mamenchosaurus. How would you pronounce that? Mamenchosaurus?
I was taught or heard it most often said Mamenchisaurus, but I can't remember what like Mamench derives from, but I know it. I'm pretty certain it's like something Chinese, so I would defer to a Chinese paleontologist as far as the proper pronunciation.
Let's go right now for Mamenchosaurus then. I think it's named after the kind of river where it was found.
I think it's something like that. And the same way, like I'm of course American, so it's Diplodocus, although that hasn't been in a Jurassic movie yet. God, we pray every time. Not everyone always thinks it's like Diplocalus. No, that's something else. Or Brits have a weird way of saying it. I'm not going to do a good
Diplodocus.
Yeah, Leviosa, not Leviosa.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, on that note, there's another Jurassic sauropods in the Jurassic World movie, Apatosaurus. So not quite Diplodocus, but coexisted with Diplodocus.
Yep, right alongside of it.
Yeah. And then we had Dreadnoughtus as well in Jurassic World Dominion, which kind of brings us on to kind of the group of dinosaurs that the Titanosaurus from Jurassic World Rebirth is. Now, this is an interesting one because they call it a Titanosaurus, but from what I know, Titanosaurus is only known from as a species is only known from very small fragmentary kind of remains, whereas this dinosaur that we see in the film is presented as like the largest. They literally say it's the largest dinosaur that's ever lived, which currently that award would go to one of maybe one of 2 or 3 other dinosaurs, but are part of that larger Titanosaur family, right?
Yep, correct. So yeah, I always appreciate that, you don't just see T-Rex, Triceratops, rinse and repeat as far as like the dinosaur assemblage. So it is neat. I'm a little interested why they picked Titanosaurus, because you're right, like it's this, nomen dubium. It was just a handful of bones originally, I think like India as well. There have been, of course, over the years, like especially the Cope and Marsh era, there was like other Titanosaur, like, described names. And I guess just like Titanic lizard, like, I guess it's a good name. So, especially if you're picking a movie where it's supposed to be the 3 biggest dinosaurs, but only one of them was an actual dinosaur, like you might as well go with the Titanic lizard, right? Like, sure, why not?
Yeah. I think it is definitely down to the name. I almost feel like Dreadnoughtus was chosen for that reason, because it's barely in Jurassic World Dominion, but it's got that amazing name. And there was a thing that I saw pointed out, which could be a clue as to why it's called Titanosaurus, is that that's a name of one of the monsters that Godzilla fought in one of his many movies, that has orange fins on the back of its neck, kind of like how the one in this movie has been designed. And Gareth Edwards, the director, is a big Godzilla fan, so I can't help but think maybe there's something's going on there. Maybe he pushed for it to be called Titanosaurus because that monster was called Titanosaurus. Like, accuracy kind of be damned.
Kinda be damned.
Well, let's talk about it then. So it's a funny one to talk about because we can't exactly talk about Titanosaurus the species. So let's just talk about Titanosaurs.
Yeah, that's safe ground.
So that's safe ground. Exactly. So this thing in the movie, it's very big. It's way bigger than even the Dreadnoughtus from Jurassic World Dominion. It's gonna be around, like, it's hard to say. I don't think they've released a figure, but it looks like it's between like 40 and 50 meters long, and its tail is absolutely immense. But how big did Titanosaurs as a group and the individual genus and species within those, how big did they get? Because they got real big, didn't they?
They did. I mean, so Titanosauria and their phylogeny, so that's their family tree, if you will, is undergoing a lot of iterations and change. We're finding new ones all the time. We're finding more of other ones, filling in the missing pieces. So it's, their relationship is still in development, shall I say. But 9 out of 10, if you think of a sauropod that lived in the Cretaceous, safe bet is it's a titanosaur. They were an incredibly successful group. They're global, and they weren't all titans, right? We actually do have some medium-sized, even by sauropod standards, small titanosaurs, but as the name implies, they are the real behemoths. So yes, we do have other diplodocids like, Diplodocus halorum and Supersaurus that get into similar lengths, body lengths. And, Apatosaurus even, not a titanosaur, but with similar body masses. But, if we're looking at our contenders of what are the largest dinosaurs, so in terms of body length or body mass, even though it's debated, who's, the ultimate heavyweight in those respects, I mean, the contenders are titanosaurs. So you have things, titanosaurs such as Patagotitan, which, possibly is the longest. I mean, that's who I put my money on. So, somewhere in the 120 foot, we're going to figure that out in meter range. And then Argentinosaurus is, possibly being the heaviest. And, as I always tell my students, weight is a touchy subject, dinosaurs not excluded. So, it depends on whose mass estimation method you go with and why, but I mean, call it like a 70-ton animal. I mean, ballpark. I mean, they're the biggest terrestrial organisms that have ever walked the earth. So yeah, they were big.
It's incredible. There was a cast of a skeleton. I think it was Patagotitan that was displayed at the American Museum of Natural History and also the Natural History Museum in London, and you were able to walk between its legs and really get a vibe of the size of this thing. And it was just like, it was like that moment in the first Jurassic Park for me when I walked through its legs, and for all the visitors I saw in there as well. Like, it's just incredible being in the presence of even the cast of the fossilized bones of this animal. That enough is just awe-inspiring.
Yeah, I was there at the NHM and got to see it right after. I think the exhibit had only been open a month or so. And
Nice.
that was a great exhibit. I mean, all exhibit stuff aside, but like the fact that you basically walked or you experienced an exhibit around and in between a dinosaur skeleton, and that's a exhibit perspective. I mean, you got more fingers on than opportunities like that you get. And it had a sauropod specific themed gift store, which was amazing. I was upset, one, that I didn't know the NHM had licensed their own Titanosaur model, and I didn't know about that and didn't buy it. And two, they didn't sell my sauropod book, but that's just me being petty.
We'll have to get that in for the next one, I reckon.
I know.
So you mentioned there as well around 70 tons for these animals. I just wanted to pick up, there is a line that has been pointed out from Jurassic World Rebirth as well, when they're talking about the absolute size of the Titanosaurus, and they say 11 tons, which would be, I would be amazed if its skeleton weighs 11 tons only. So I think that is just one of those kind of errors that didn't get picked up on at any point in the film, because there's no way that the animal that they show in the movie weighs only 11 tons compared to around 70 tons for the real ones.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, but it's a movie, it's a blockbuster movie, it's not a documentary, you know, but yes, there was maybe a pinch less science that was listened to, because I like to imagine Steve Brusatte was just like screaming all this stuff at the top of his lungs, you know. So I don't think Steve would have said that as 11, but you know, maybe that gets a visitor you know, or someone who watches the movie to be like, wow, how can something so big weigh so little? And then they fact check it, you know. So maybe it was forcefully getting people to fact check.
Yeah, it draws them to the real exhibits and the real museums. You know, that's the case with all of these things. That's why they're fun and people love them. And we had Steve on here to talk about Dominion, and he made a very big case that he is the advisor, not the writer.
Yep.
And they can take his advice or they can reject it. So he left it at that.
Yep, I remember Jack Horner telling us the same things. You know, whoever the director of the special effects people would ask about how this dinosaur would move or act or do all this kind of stuff, and he'd tell them, and they'd basically just smile and nod and be like, great, that's pretty lame, we're gonna have it, you know, I don't know, do a backflip through, you know, an explosion, you know, because that's what'll be entertaining.
And hey, it sells. These films seem to not be able to make under $1 billion every time they come out, so I guess that's working for people.
And I would love it if they just funneled that love back into paleo a little more. Maybe it is, but you know. But
yeah, send some more funding this way.
Exactly.
So, talking about these massive animals, obviously a huge part of why they're iconic and what's so unique are those necks. Absolutely massive necks by modern day standards. We have the giraffe, but it doesn't even really come close to the sauropod necks. And we see a bunch of different neck postures across the Jurassic movies. We've got the Brachiosaurus, where it's very vertical, very upright. The Titanosaur in Rebirth, interestingly, in the first trailer, had quite a vertical neck going right up. And then it seemed like it kind of got revised for the final film to be a bit more horizontal. Necks. Talk to me about these necks. Why were they so long? Is it to reach vegetation? But like so far away. What's going on here?
Yes, the neck is the most iconic thing of a sauropod because it's so long. And yeah, so just a mammalian primer, because we're mammals, right? Most mammals, not all, but most mammals have 7 cervical vertebrae. So even a giraffe, right? So it doesn't increase, you know, like a giraffe doesn't have a particularly like a neck made up of a lot of vertebrae. It just elongates those few vertebrae it has. Sauropods kind of do a mix of both, so it depends on which group, which clade you're looking at, but something like Apatosaurus or Diplodocus had 15 cervicals, so 15 bones in its neck. Now, that's also a lot, but they were also long, or some of them, you know, especially like in the mid neck, are really long. There are some, like some species of Amenchisaurus that could have had 18 or 19. Now, that pales in comparison to some modern birds that have like over 20 something. So, more, but even then, like some species of Amenchisaurus, the neck is proportional to the body is like 2/3 the length of the body. So it is crazy. Now, what they were doing with their necks, that is the fastest fighting topic of sauropod paleobiologists. And because you're talking to me, you're not going to get a biased opinion whatsoever. But there was this historical classic idea that sauropods used their necks and they held them up like swans, and they used them to basically vertically feed on the tops of the trees. So that's kind of what inspired how we see the Brachiosaurus in the first Jurassic Park, right? There's been a lot more work and a lot more debate on sauropod neck posture, but if you look at sauropods like Apatosaurus and Diplodocus, their cervicals, so the bones in their necks, have the spine, so like if you were touching the back of your neck, like what you would feel the tops of your spines, they actually have a split spine, and they're pretty dramatic. And certain groups of sauropods, these split spines get really big, really deep. Some are big, narrow, big wide U's. Others are narrow V's. Others, like Brachiosaurus, other sauropods like Brachiosaurus, didn't have these split spines. So what is this split spine for? So work done by myself, and especially a lot of the work that was done, pioneered by Kent Stevens, doing some of the first computer modeling and range of motion studies of dinosaurs, has all found supporting evidence that at least sauropods like Apatosaurus and Diplodocus couldn't actually hold their necks swan-like, but they were actually held them out from the body like booms. And although be it debated, especially some of the work on these split spines has suggested that the split spine actually was for a split ligament that ran along them. And if you're feeding like the Brachiosaurus in Jurassic Park from the top of a tree, you always have to keep moving when you're eating, right? Because you take a bite out of that tree, but you got to keep walking around that tree. So that's not very energy efficient. But if you're standing in one spot and you have this outstretched neck and a ligament, right, just a rubber band, if you're able to pull it with muscle forces one way, you can basically sort of let it go. And because of elastic rebound that's happening each time the neck sways, it's not free energy, but it's pretty darn energy efficient, where you can just sweep side to side to feed. And then once you've cleared that area, one step forward and you're in a whole new grazing area. Now, what we think, and there's been a lot of especially good work, especially Dan Vidal has been doing a lot of this, we're showing that contrary to the Diplodocus and Apatosaurus, those groups had the split spines, sauropods like Brachiosaurus and its co-occurring kin Camarasaurus, what's unique about those sauropods, especially when you see Brachiosaurus, right, one of the iconic things about it is it's not just its long neck, it's its long forelimbs. And so this is actually the same thing we see with giraffes. Giraffes don't have long necks to feed higher up off the ground. The way they feed higher off the ground is just to increase the length of their forearms. Because when your shoulders are higher off the ground, the neutral position for your head is higher off the ground anyway. And so, yes, these sauropods probably could have fed at higher heights, but this diversity literally in like how their forelimbs are oriented, where their heads are positioned, and then even the shape of their neck bones telling us how they moved, really creates this really cool picture that's almost like what we think about like the African savanna, right? All these different herbivores that are stratified to feed on different, not just different types of vegetation, but different heights. We think in some of these really rich sauropod ecosystems, like the Morrison Formation, where we get a lot of these sauropods co-occurring, that may explain what they're doing with the differences in their necks and how they're using them.
That's incredible. So rather than like a cherry picker kind of, stair lift going right up, they're kind of like a crane swinging back and forth, like horizontally, essentially.
Yeah,
kind
some of them
post themselves up in one position, and then you can just eat all around in front of you rather than moving around.
Yeah, and even So like things like Diplodocus and Apatosaurus, right? Their UK viewers will have to look them up, but we have these things in the US. Every time you're flying over an agricultural field and you see all these circles, and you're like, well, why are they circles? So they have this thing called a pivot irrigator, and it's actually this water spray system that is stretched out and moves left to right and sprays water. So and it has these big V-shaped systems and support and split cables. So I actually modeled a Diplodocus neck on that. But even something like a Brachiosaurus, right? With that tall shoulder and that shoulder hump that it has, just like giraffes, that still puts that ligament under tension when the animal bends down a bit. So even things like Brachiosaurus could still have probably fed through different heights, but have probably relied on some of that similar ligament rebound system too. And their teeth tell us that they were feeding on completely different types of vegetation too. So, yeah, they were these big bulk, probably grazers in a loose sense, but yeah, what they were feeding on, how they were feeding, radically different between the different kinds and different groups of sauropods.
That's incredible. Yeah, you can, if you go to a museum and you look in sauropod mouths, there's so much diversity in terms of the teeth, and I just kind of want to talk about that a bit actually. So, obviously they spent a lot of their life eating, and that kind of leads into another question, which is one that gets asked a lot at museums. I'd love to hear your take on it. How did they get just so big as a group of animals? Because they are, as you said, they're the largest terrestrial animals that have ever existed, and probably, well, up until this point, ever will exist. So how did it get to that point?
Well, I think what's always added interesting, I always tell people, is they were doing it by not eating grass, right? Because even though grass started to evolve, I mean, it's debatable when in the Cretaceous, like it wasn't the global plant that it is today, right? So there are a lot of plants that were around, like different kinds of gymnosperms that are toxic today to animals, but obviously these animals would have had some sort of, evolved defense to them. But there were also plants like, a lot of types of ferns and things like that early on or, in their development and growth are pretty darn nutritious. We think that sauropods were probably equivalent to like a hindgut fermenter. So not that they had multiple stomachs, right? We think about it like a cow, but they basically would have, they wouldn't have really chewed plants, not like mammal chewing at least, but broken off small pieces of it, swallowed it. Then from the stomach, it would go to an area in the gut where basically it could just store and ferment. And of course, a lot more nutrients is released from fermentation. And there have been a lot of really good studies, especially, led by Carol G, that have looked at, even because a lot of these same types of plants are around today, and they've basically done like sort of mock fermentation trials to see like the kinds of, the calories released, even like how long digestion would have taken. So, I mean, the short answer is it's amazing that they did this, and also like, yeah, we talk about these 100-foot-long sauropods, right? That's a big animal. It's got a head about the size of a horse. For all intents and purposes, the head on a sauropod is just the tip of an elephant's trunk, right? There ain't much going on up front, in the noggin of a sauropod, I have to admit it. But it's just taking everything coming in, like it's just food. Again, they didn't chew, at least they didn't have molars like we think of mammal chewing. So, very simple cropping or stripping and then swallowing. Then also, like, think about swallowing and breathing. Imagine, you're sucking down a drink at a party, but you're doing it down a 40-foot-long straw, right? That's the neck. So how does food not just get stuck? I mean, think of the muscle contractions needed in their esophagus. In the trachea, think about it. How do you breathe in and out with a 40-foot-long windpipe and not pass out between breaths? But you're able to do all of this. You're so metabolically efficient that you are, for all intents and purposes, warm-blooded, right? Warm-blooded and cold-blooded. And the day you hatched out of an egg about the size of a grapefruit, you're on to just being an eating, growing machine. And in 20 years, you're one of the biggest animals that's ever walked the planet. Like, I only somewhat joke with people that I say, like, at certain times of their development, I bet you could have come darn close to watching a sauropod grow.
20 years and they would get to like a massive size. That's incredible.
Yeah, it varies across the different sauropods, and we don't have life history data for a lot of them. But things like Diplodocus, so that's what I did my master's degree on, was really understanding its life history. So if we assume the life history of one sauropod was similar to others, we know that's not perfect, but I mean, again, if you figure in that 2 to 3 decade range for other sauropods, which is pretty reasonable, I mean, and they would have done the bulk of their growing like Diplodocus. Again, the bulk of their growing by their teenage years, really.
And you can tell that by looking at like the growth rings within their bones. Is that the main way you can kind of glean that information?
Yeah, so what we do is we take a chunk of bone out. It has to be certain particular bones of the skeleton. And we make a microscopic slide. So we grind the bone down so it's so thin that light will pass through it. And we look at it under a microscope. And it's analogous to tree rings. You know, like you see a stump cut down, you see all the rings, and you count the rings to tell how old the tree was when it was cut down. It's similar. You know, it's not always a perfect story. You know, there can be reasons why, like, if you're really sick, right, you may deposit weird bone. But for all intents and purposes, that's, you know, the tree ring analogy is how we at least come up with an estimate of how old these animals were when they died.
That's amazing that we've got that information for some sauropods, some others maybe will come down the line, but it's incredible to think these things were just growing so much every day until they're about 20. And actually talking about how big their necks were, of course, you need to counterbalance that. So they don't fall over front ways, and they've got those huge tails, massive tails on the other ends of their bodies. And this Titanosaur that we see in Jurassic World Rebirth, it's kind of like snake-like, it's kind of a whip-like tail. So yeah, obviously a tail was great for counterbalancing, but do we have a kind of any evidence or kind of speculation they may have used their tails for other purposes as well? Like we see them in Rebirth, they're kind of like flicking them back and forth a bit, and there's a little bit of courtship going on that seems quite speculative. But like, yeah, if you've got a long tail, could you use it for anything?
I mean, the short answer is maybe. I mean, I will say this, like, everyone's always looking at the front end of a sauropod, and I will admit I do too. But the tails don't get the love and respect they should. Now, yes, in a sauropod like Diplodocus or Apatosaurus, right, you have this really long neck, and then you have this really long tail. And the counterbalance idea makes perfect sense, right? Especially like if the way they're moving, right? You know, oh, you have one big moving weight off the front, you need a weight off the back. You know, we see the same things like Tyrannosaurs, right? They have big, massive heads, they have really big, massive tails. And then that notion just goes away because we have things like Mamenchisaurus, right? And I said, like, you know, 2/3 of its body length is its neck, which means about 1/3 of its body length is tail. What's going on there? How, like, I don't understand Mamenchisaur neck posture. I will admit that to, you know, all the people who don't like my hypotheses, but I'm like, I don't understand balance-wise how that works. Brachiosaurus, right? It is more angled in its neck posture, but it has proportionately has a ridiculously short little tail. So, like, a big neck doesn't by default equal a big tail. And I mean, a lot of these Titanosaurs have what we call wide gauge tracks. So they have like, there's no delicate way to say this. They got wide, I mean, super, like wide load sticker. They beep when backing up, that kind of stuff. And even though the biomechanics and the musculature reconstruction hasn't been done yet, I can really only fathom that they were ridiculous beefcakes walking around in the Mesozoic. Like, that's the only way I can figure out how you put that much of an animal up front and balance it with so little osteology in the back. So that's generally, right, like, you know, how you see these sauropods. The Titanosaurus, though, in Rebirth makes absolutely no sense. I am going to put my little scientific hat on, at least say why, because
go for it.
It has this very long, very robust neck, and then it's got a tail that just, like, it's doing something else. Like, it floats. I don't know what's going on there. It's all whip, right? It's all whip. It's just nothing else. So, like,
it's kind of like a rat tail.
A floaty rat tail, sure. It's a ribbon. It's a ribbon dancer, you know? It's got that. So it doesn't make sense. Now, function of the tail, yes. So the tails of dinosaurs were very important actually for locomotion because the fourth trochanter on the femur, that's a big muscle attachment for the caudofemoralis. So there's actually a big muscle that runs back up along the tail. So dinosaur tails are actually really important for them to walk. And in sauropods, there is a group like Diplodocus that are called the flagella caudatans. So that means the whip tails. And that group has been very popularized as using their tails just like a bullwhip. And it is incredibly debated, but I think there's a wonderful scientific thought process of a series of papers that basically questioned, could these tails crack the sound barrier? And the findings are super debated by their paleontologists, but like the proof of concept and like what physics tells you on paper versus like when you actually build something, like I think it's a beautiful exercise that we really need to follow through with more paleontological concepts. But could they use their tails like as defense? Yeah, I mean, I live in Miami and there's a ton of iguanas everywhere, and like like you'll see them smacking at a dog or something. So the idea of using a tail in some sort of defense thing, I mean, when push comes to shove, an animal will use most of itself as a defensive weapon if it has to use it as such. So like, was that what the tail was for? I'm not 100% on the fence. I do personally really like the idea of, God, someone had a word for it once in a paper, and I've just lost it, what they called it, but I think it was passive defense. So the idea of like, if you have a Diplodocus feeding out in the open, and it's sweet feeding, but if you have the tail, and especially the last whippy bit, and that has to passively move to counteract the movement of the neck, but you have this one end that's really going wild and crazy, like that's kind of a anti-predation system in and of itself. There's been some really weird, crazy ideas put out there that tails were for like communication, like not just making sound and those sounds having their own tail language, if you will, but like as tactile organs, which, I mean, every bit of that's made up. And I mean, you might as well say the moon tastes like cheese, like it's just, there's no support for that whatsoever.
I feel like that's kind of what we see in the Rebirth movie, that there's two of the Titanosaurs and they're kind of cuddling, I guess, each other with the tails. So I think maybe they went down that route, but that's incredible. The scientific kind of process that you're explaining there of like trying to figure out if a Diplodocus tail could crack the sound barrier. That's really, really cool. And I'll be keeping an eye out to see how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, that was a series of papers led by Nathan Murfold, and it's not really supported by a lot of the sauropod people, and he tested it on physics on paper and said the tail should crack. Then he made a physical model of it and brought it to a conference, and that was just his presentation, this guy whipping the tail. It could crack, but then you had all these other paleontologists saying, oh, well, when you add skin and muscle and all this kind of stuff, the physics of it slows it down so it won't actually crack the sound barrier. And my whole point is like, if cracking the sound barrier is the only thing you use to define a whip, that's fine. But that iguana smacked the shit out of me on the street with its tail. Like, a whip is a whip. So like, I think I think the physics shows it could use its tail in a whip-like function. And that still is every bit as plausible to me.
Yeah, especially if it's like 10 to 20 tons. I think that's going to do some damage.
If that thing was swinging its tail at me, the last thing I'd be worried about is a noise that the tip of the tail makes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm waiting for the day that they put that in a Jurassic movie. I know they've done the kind of tail whipping in some of the side stuff, but like, we need to see that in a movie. That would make for a great scene where a sauropod actually defends itself for once.
Yeah, I mean, that was old school 99 Walking with Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
But yes, in a Jurassic movie, that would be cool as long as they were real dinosaurs that were facing off against real dinosaurs. Maybe we go back to the OG.
Yeah. that'll be one safer when they finally bring the Diplodocus rather.
They were teasing me. They released that, I collect sauropod everything. So when they started doing all these giant Jurassic sauropods, I had to buy the whole series, and they release one a year. And they draw the Diplodocus I was like, oh, yeah, this is, and we were only getting mystery teases. So I bet all my money that, it was, that Diplodocus was going to be our new mystery sauropod. And
That was an interesting thing, not to get too sidetracked, but every sauropod they've released was one from a movie, and then they also did Diplodocus. So maybe it was meant to be in there at some point and it got replaced or something.
Or it's a teaser for the next one. I actually have that Diplodocus in my office.
That's awesome. It's massive, isn't it? It's like be as long as a desk.
Oh, yeah, it's like 4 feet. It's great.
It's great. They never used to make them that big when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's why, you got to do it now.
You got to do it now. We spoke, I mean, you mentioned briefly there about, debates around what a sauropod can do with its tail when you account for the soft tissue and the muscle attachments. Talking about soft tissue, they sauropods that we see in the Jurassic film, traditionally in the first trilogy and in Apatosaurus as well, they've got quite kind of saggy, like elephant style skin. There are some scales on there, but generally speaking, it's quite leathery. The Titanosaurus, when the paleontologist character goes up and touches it, actually is covered in quite large scales. But in between those scales, I noticed in that scene, there's like these kind of like filaments coming out between its scales that almost look like keratin, like kind of quills or something. I wanted to ask, do we have any kind of soft skin impressions of any sauropods that any of this stuff could relate to?
Yes and no. So we have quite a lot of sauropod skin impressions, and we are getting tracks of fossilized skin. So Tess Gallagher is really leading the work in what we know about sauropod skin, especially Diplodocus skin. So yes, it was refreshing not to see, scaly elephants this time around. But what we're learning about sauropods, as well as other dinosaurs in general, but I say in this context specifically for sauropods, is there seems to be a lot of variation in the scales across the body. So it's not just rinse and repeat cookie cutter one scale. It's not just bigger versus smaller scales. Like the scales up along basically the midline of the back are very different from like the scales that you might have on the flank versus the arm. We published on it, was really cool just a few weeks ago, some sauropod tracks from Mongolia we found. And they were so cool because they were so well preserved. They had the skin impressions on the hands and the feet, and it was so well preserved. Those scales were each scale was basically a little pyramid. So spiky. And we think that's actually because you see that in some desert-dwelling tortoises, and basically is an adaptation for these animals for walking on sandy substrate, because it helps, disperse the weight because there's more surface area. So, not that all sauropods had that, but, there's quite a lot of variation in their scales. Now, we haven't found anything like a proto-feather, whisker-looking thing. I'm of the mindset, for many reasons, we won't, just with their whole overall physiology. But, the big lumpy skin was, that was at least something nice to look on that critter.
Yeah, it was cool to see that. Like it was a visual distinction from how we'd seen the sauropods previously. And actually, on that note, we don't really see much of like the claws on its feet or anything, but the sauropods from some of the previous movies, they kind of literally just had elephant feet as well, with very blunt kind of claws. Whereas like I know that some sauropods, they actually had like some sharp claws sticking out towards the side of their forelimbs.
Yeah, so the feet are probably the easiest thing to kind of discuss in mass, but for the foot of a sauropod, just look at a tortoise. Grew an elephant, look at a tortoise. Like those, especially those large claws, but how they're they curve around the foot. Like just look at a tortoise foot, and that's a sauropod foot. Now, as far as the hand, that's where you get more variation, and especially through sauropod evolution, what's really cool, and we think it has to do with increasing body mass, is we don't see them lose digits, like lose the number of digits. They actually lose like the bone. So imagine like through their evolution, their hand is basically just getting put on like a deli slicer. And so when you end up like in some of the latest titanosaurs, I mean, they are quite literally knuckle walking. they're not vestigial. They do not have any of the tiny little digits.
That's actually recontextualizes the Titanosaur fossil, the cast that we had in the Natural History Museum, because you're looking at that thing's feet, it was like, where are the toes?
Yeah.
It didn't have them.
There's this, I think it's really good support for it that's just literally to create part of that columnar stance. And if you imagine an animal that big and the base of your column, aka leg, has something that's a lot of small pieces that spreads out, that's a plane of weakness. So by just basically getting rid of your fingers and wrapping, well, people can't see us at home, but basically just wrapping, what would be your palm all up in flesh. Like, that's how you make a good stubby solid pad for your weight to rest on. And yes, there are other sauropods, like, we think again, like Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, and the like. They did on their hands, they did have not a guanodon level, but, they did have, let's call it a thumb claw, if you will. And that has ranged the speculative gambit from, defense like a guanodon to being an extra handhold, for that certain special time of year.
Well, talking of that, that is we kind of see a bit of, I've mentioned a couple times that there's like a bit of a courtship happening between a male and a female by the looks of it in Jurassic World Rebirth of the Titanosaurs. I mean, like, do we have any kind of idea of how that kind of could have gone down with such huge animals? Like, we kind of just see them embracing, but there's been a lot of rumors. I mean, actually, it was confirmed online that an early version of the script, they were kind of getting it on, and then that's how they were distracted, and our characters would have obtained a DNA sample. But yeah, like with creatures that big, like how would we even know how that would happen?
We don't, I mean, like, okay, and I know elephants aren't the best analogy because even by sauropod standards, they're small. But I mean, it is amazing how agile big animals can be. So the idea of if sauropods made it in what we think of might be a traditional mammalian style copulation, like dealing with the physics and weight of distribution, like that doesn't really surprise me. Also, like, I hate to say, like, even if, one of the sexes got, male or female got injured during it, biologically, that doesn't matter. Biology only cares that you can pass it on to the next generation. So, like, I mean, there's some cool work coming out that on, like, all of these weird injuries in hadrosaur tails, and weirdly enough, it's, like, at the base of the tail and is basically only in 50% of them. So there's some cool work coming out that suggests those might be mating injuries, right? So you wouldn't think that, like, an injury that prolific would be evolutionarily advantageous. Now, it wasn't advantageous to get hurt, but you had to do the deed, right? And as long as you were able to succeed, right, that's the important thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have no evidence for any of that. I mean, however lewd they wanted to make it in the Jurassic movie, go good for them. Really, the only thing we have any idea of as far as sauropod reproduction is basically once reproduction has happened. So we have loads of sauropod nesting sites all around the world. And I'm not the biggest fan in the world of making modern animal analogies to dinosaurs because they were very different, but I do think this is one that is very appropriate. Sauropods are sea turtles, right? These probably seasonal, these big aggregates of at least females, presumably because the ones laying eggs, just like sea turtles laid these very, very simple constructed nests. So with those tortoise-like hind feet, there have been some great papers led by Denver Fowler and Lee and Ashley Hall just on that topic, where they basically just scratch out a very simple nest, deposit a bunch of eggs in mass, loosely cover them, if really any, and then just all leave. And then just like you see on those documentaries, the mass hatching. And so, we have no idea how many baby sauropods that, just like sea turtles actually made it to adulthood, but their biological strategy seems to have been just to absolutely flood the ecosystems with their young.
So they did move in herds then, at least when they were laying eggs.
Yeah, we have some evidence. I think we have better evidence for some sauropods being herding animals, and I don't mind the idea of them herding, but again, it's a sort of same viewpoint, right? Why we can't assume that something that one animal does means that all other animals related to it had to do the same kinds of things, right? Because like lions live in prides, at least the females do, but tigers don't, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't just say all big cats do or do not live in herds. I think we have some really good evidence of sauropods, at least in North America, like Brachiosaurus and Haplacanthosaurus, because when we find them, it's just like one at a time. Like, I don't know of any bone beds where we have 8 Haplacanthosaurus together, but I can tell you a whole bunch of bone beds where we have a mess of the Diplodocus at once. Maybe some weren't just seasonal herders, and maybe others were only seasonal herders.
Right, got it. If we're talking about, sauropods in the same kind of ecosystem, even if they're different species and stuff, and kind of how they're distinguishing themselves from other individuals, do we have any kind of information on how they would communicate? I know there was like a little moment earlier where we spoke about tails, but I mean, in terms of vocalizations in the Jurassic movies, they've always got these, they use kind of whale song basically for all of the sauropods. That they have like this very resonant, very beautiful kind of whale song. But then I guess Rebirth does add something new to the mix because you've got those kinds of more speculative elements where it's got like a fin that extends on the back of its neck and then like a big kind of nasal sac, which I'm assuming is probably how that sauropod in the movie, makes these huge noises and stuff. Do we have any kind of idea of like, maybe based on the skull shape or stuff, how they would keep in touch with each other?
There's a lot of good work that's been done looking at the neurology, and it's for endocast, so basically the void left from where the brain had been. And some that's been really good work done on titanosaurs. Like there's a beautiful one from South America, Sarmientosaurus, showed that it had really good eyesight. There's been, I don't remember the names of the taxa, but other sauropods that had good senses of hearing. They don't seem to have the sinus passages like we would be used to thinking about, like the hadrosaurs or even ankylosaurs. Like, God, if I could go back and hear a rootin' tootin' ankylosaur, that would definitely be one for the books. But, so we don't have evidence of that level of sound. But, they, at least based on some of those where we have evidence for good eyesight and good hearing, it does seem like they were visually perceptive, right? Not just, these big dumb things just happen to bump into something. As far as anything else like that, we don't have any evidence for. The inflatable sacks, like, that's, it's an interesting idea. I mean, because a lot of extant animals do, like a lot of birds especially, have like, and elephant seals, right? They have these big inflatable waddles and things. And with other sauropods, especially the macronarians, so titanosaur lineage type things, you still always see sauropods reconstructed with their, like a brachiosaurus, right? With the nostrils up top on the head, but they're not. They're still at basically the tip of the snout. But having some sort of fleshy structure that could inflate in those areas, I don't think is impossible. I mean, I will admit just my own take on it. Levels of things you see like the Lucititan and the new walking dinosaur, I think is potentially a little bit less plausible, but and I know it's completely different animation style, but actually in seeing all the, I hope he listens to this, but in seeing all the trailers and upcoming footage from the new season of Dinosauria, I think Armsby, like he has a titanosaur that, from above, and it shows has the right place nostrils, but has a sort of a bit of a, I don't know, let's just call it inflatable sack, but like that looked the most realistic on how that could be of any I've seen to date. So no evidence for it, but I think he's on to something there.
I feel like obviously there's been it's like I mean, we've had paleo art kind of push the boundaries beyond kind of what we know for a good while, like since like the dinosaur kind of revolution and stuff in the 60s and 70s, but like there has been a recent kind of reinvigoration where there's these traits taken from modern day animals and translated onto prehistoric ones where we don't necessarily know that that's the case, but I see it as a useful exercise for engaging the wider public on like, these are these are real animals that once existed, and they would have done weird things that we wouldn't know about, just by looking at the fossilized bones. And I almost feel like we've gotten to this point now where the Jurassic movie, we've had like the extending frills on the Dilophosaurus, we've had T-Rex can't see you, its vision is based on movement, all of this stuff. And it's now kind of come full circle where now the Titanosaurus based on some of these more recent reconstructions using these kinds of speculative features. Like in Prehistoric Planet, there was a Titanosaur, I think, that had like these sorts of kind of sacs and stuff. So it almost feels like it's feeding back into that, but in its own Jurassic Parkified way.
Yeah, I mean, this will be a whole nother podcast in and of itself, but like, I think there's something definitely be said of not just in the Jurassic Park era, but like you could just as equal to Crystal Palace era, right? Like the scientific knowledge that we had at the time, using that knowledge to restore a life reconstruction of an extinct animal, and you have to fill in the missing pieces with modern animals, right? Like even the Crystal Palace dinosaurs, they didn't have dinosaur skin. They were just big lizards. So, slap big lizard on it and that looks good, right? Jurassic Park, the first one, it had its own blend of, science in it, right? Like, T-Rex, that was a lot of the work Jack Horner was starting to do, showing, how Rex had an amazing sense of smell, right? So if it has an amazing sense of smell, then other senses might be lesser. So like, you can see some of that, science that's kind of weaved in. I will admit my own two sakes, especially in these newer Jurassic movies, I don't know I could honestly tell someone sitting in the theater next to me that like, oh, that idea stems from this other idea, like, that's Disney magic. Like when in doubt something weird, they just pulled that from some other critter. Like I gotta admit though, which is funny about that too, and I'm sure naming wise they would not like it, but like I am absolutely amazed colossal bioscience has not been derived in some sort of like evil corporate entity in these movies yet. Because that's the closest thing. Like they're the ones who are that's the closest thing to the movie. So like, at least in similar train of thought, like when people ask, people on the street ask me about these movies, I'm like, well, they're not documentaries. And they're like, well, is any of it based in reality? I'm like, they're like, well, you can't really mix all that stuff with animals. I'm like, you kind of can. There's actually a company, I mean, they'll tell you they're making a dire wolf or any other thing under the sun. It's probably just a gerbil, but they're trying.
Yeah, not to get too off topic, I saw they're also trying to bring back, I guess technically, the first de-extinct dinosaur, the moa from New Zealand. So we'll be interested to see what they try and call a moa when that turns out.
I want to talk to one of those people so bad, because I don't like their PR, but if you actually listen to some of the people for the conservation side of what they're doing, that sounds like amazingly heroic. But what I don't understand is they're U.S. based, trying to use the U.S. for a lot of this big push. Why they just don't start with bison latifrons? Like, it is literally what they're doing. Just altering genes in existing animals to end up with an animal that looks like a facsimile of what we think with. It's the same genus of bison that we have today. It's been shown they're all the same species. They already know how to make something big. Horn control should be easy. Like, I don't know. That's a weird one. Hopefully someone of them listens to this.
Yeah, we need to get this conversation to happen at some point, because that does sound like a good, sensible first idea before you go for the weird and wild stuff. It just get back to sauropods just before we sort of wrap up here. There's going all the way back to the first Jurassic Park film. There's the most iconic moment, maybe of all the films, is when the Brachiosaurus rears up on its hind legs to get the leaves from the very top of the tree. Now, we've already spoken about maybe going up is not the most energy efficient way, but taking that away, we've spoken also about the different sauropods, with some have the weight over their shoulders and therefore they've got those really big column-like legs, and some we've spoken about have these kind of spikes on their thumbs. So could some sauropods have reared up on their back legs?
I'm sure they could have. I mean, I was at an event years ago. I'll never forget this. And someone asked Jack Horner that question if sauropods could, rear up on their hind legs. And he said, well, at least once a year, half of them could. And
there we go.
But that's the same thing. Like, I love this example and I love it. But like, osteology, so bones, morphology, the shape of them, gives you a good idea of what it's doing, what the animal is doing, but it's not a one-to-one. And the example I love is you go to Morocco and you see those famed tree-climbing goats. There's not a damn adaptation a goat has for climbing trees, yet they do it. So if there was a sauropod and, for whatever reason, the best-looking bit of plant happened to be up high and it had to, rear on its hind legs and kind of hold onto the tree and stretch its neck to get it, I don't think that would be impossible, but it's also probably not what the animal is doing every day.
Yeah. And I mean, that is a great point that, they're going to have to at some point in their life cycle, at least half of them. Right. So before we kind of wrap up properly, as we did in the last show, we have our Dino DNA rating in keeping with the Jurassic theme. These are genetically engineered theme park monsters. It's a movie. But if we were to compare our Titanosaurus, and let's be generous, let's say Titanosaurus in a movie, we're just going to compare it to any Titanosaur we want. What percentage of that genetic material is actually in this creature, and what's left, what's been thrown in there to make the rest of this? I would say with this one, for me, it's the percentage. It's going to be a bit lower than we normally do in the show because those things like the tail, the sheer size of the thing. What are you going to go for?
I mean, I feel like I should have thought about this sooner, but I feel on the high end 20%. It's got 4 legs, it's big, long neck, long tail, and that, for me, that's about where it ends.
It's got those big scales.
That's why it's 20, as high as 20.
And then they've probably thrown in, I guess, maybe some sort of fish or something to give it big fins on its neck.
I just want to know the floaty tail. I know it's a movie. I know it's, it's not even real. It was made on a computer screen, but that floaty tail. And I watched it damn hard. It just seems to float on the wind and around. It just, physics doesn't make sense. Gravity with that thing's tail doesn't make sense.
We are asked to leave our scientific minds at the door for that scene, yes.
But that would have been cool, showing that big tail smacking the Distortus or whatever, the big Rancor wannabe.
Yeah, I thought that was going to happen, to be honest. I was like, how are they going to take out the Distortus Rex? They always got to take out the baddies, but they just kind of left this one. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up for this episode. So, Carrie, where can people find your stuff? And tell us about that sauropod book as well.
Yeah, so all my sauropod work, you can just look me up on Google Scholar. Every time I have a paper come out, I put it on ResearchGate just because, all these journals are, blood-sucking capitalists and the rest of us aren't. So I try to make everything of mine freely available. You can find out about my research and just other paleo stuff in general. I don't do all of the social medias, but I do Twitter and Blue Sky, and I'm under Double Beam, which is what the name Diplodocus means.
Excellent. So yeah, definitely follow Carrie and check out those papers when they're coming out. That's great that they're all freely available as well for everyone who's listening along. And you can find me at Conor Ontology. I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram. But yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on this episode, and do tune in for Dino DNA the next time we're on the Jurassic Park podcast. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but, well, there it is. There it is. I'm simply saying that life, finds a way.
That'll do it for another episode of the Jurassic Park podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in to the show this week and sharing in our love of the Jurassic franchise and, of course, very specifically, the dinosaurs. And a huge thank you, of course, goes out to Dr. Carrie Woodruff for joining us once again, bringing in so much incredible knowledge and just a great conversation with Conor. I really loved all that stuff. And you know what? I'm not going to hold it against you that you said whatever was in Jurassic World Rebirth for the Titanosaur was not accurate. Okay, it's fine. I love what we saw in that movie. And, personally for me, I'm never one to really care about how accurate these dinosaurs are in the movie franchise or the TV shows or games or whatever, and the toys. I don't really care about accuracy. What I saw in that movie was magical, so that's what I want to believe. But look, I understand the science, and I will defer to the science when it comes to talking about those things naturally. But in terms of the film, I'm like, dude, give me all that magical stuff. I want tails whipping in the air unnaturally, doesn't make any sense. I want like alien sounds coming out of these creatures. That's what I want to hear. So bravo to Jurassic World Rebirth on that front. But thank you to Dr. Carrie Woodruff for telling us the real stuff, the real information about these creatures, even if it hurts my soul a little bit. But thank you. I really, really appreciate it. My voice is really leaving. But also a huge thank you to Conor for putting together this episode. I believe this one was recorded just back in, hopefully in August. I think that's when I got it, but maybe it was a little bit before that. But I appreciate Conor putting together this episode and recording it, and always coming through with an incredibly stellar episode of Dino DNA here for the podcast. I know all the listeners, like you all out there, appreciate it. I certainly appreciate it. So thank you to Conor once again for another spectacular episode. And of course, thank you, as always, to our podcast host, Podomatic, for giving us a place to upload the show each and every week. Everybody out there, please just know that you matter. Stay safe, be kind, fight for representation, change, and equality in the Jurassic franchise, but also in the real world, where things really matter. It's incredibly needed these days, for real. So please, let's work together to make this world a better place. I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to myself for the outro. Take it away.
Saddle up, let's get this movable feast underway.
Continue the conversation with us on Threads and Instagram. Watch our content on TikTok and YouTube. Find us on the web at JurassicParkPodcast.com. You'll find today's episode show notes, articles, contributor bios, and so much more. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, our website, and wherever else podcasts are found. So please be sure to follow along and share with your friends, family, and fellow Jurassic fans. If you haven't already, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We will read your Apple reviews at the end of most episodes, so be sure to spare no expense. Don't miss our Wednesday night live streams, toy hunts, reviews, in-depth bonus content, gameplay, event and theme park coverage on our YouTube channel. If you want to get a hold of us or participate in the Jurassic Mailbag, you can fill out the contact form on our website or send emails and MP3s to JurassicParkPod@gmail.com. Feel free to call our voicemail line at any time to leave us a message or just to say hi. That number is 732-825-7763. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, enjoy.